Our world is facing unprecedented challenges. Could the current state of affairs be linked to the lack of Christians exercising their faith in politics? Join me for this week's Torah for Today as we explore the impact of Christians not exercising their faith in the public arena. Shalom and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Sutcliffe. I'm one of the pastors here at Corner Fringe Ministries. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this week's Torah for Today. I want to begin by sharing with you something remarkable that I learned recently as I was leading a group of homeschoolers through a class on the Constitution. It was intended to be just a short 8-week course where we would just go through the principles of the Constitution of the United States. And, I took the Constitution class in 8th grade many years ago. And so I was given a great resource called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. And I had never watched it before, wasn't familiar with their background, but was given this video series, and it was about 10 hours worth of study. And over the course of 8 weeks, each week I would meet once with this group of high school, age students, and we would discuss the Constitution of the United States. And I got to be honest with you, what really blew me away as somebody who studies the Torah was I could see that the Torah is interwoven into the very foundational documents of our great country. And I was just amazed by what I learned. Each week I would tell people, like, as I'm reading the Constitution document and the language, and it would call to memory all the different stories from the Torah, the instruction that God had given us, the commands for government and how to lead people. It was there and it was clear to be seen. While many of us are familiar with some of the more prominent figures, like the founding fathers like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, there were many individuals who played a pivotal role in sharing or shaping the Constitution with Christian principles. And I know this is a great debate here in America. We are at a point in our history where people like to believe, we're not based on Christian principles, but that's completely incorrect, right? There were men like John Witherspoon, who was a Scottish Presbyterian minister who served as a delegate in the Continental Congress. His faith influenced his commitment to religious freedom, a value firmly enshrined in our Constitution. Then there was this Gouverneur Morris, who authored the final draft of the Constitution. He was a man of great faith in Christ. His work helped to establish a framework that has endured for centuries. And the last one I want to point out today is John Jay. Probably the most well-known of these three, was one of the authors of the Federalist Papers and the first Chief Justice of our Supreme Court. He was also a devout believer in Messiah, and his contributions to the Constitution emphasized the importance of justice and moral values. Now, these are just three of many men and women whose faith in our God helped shape the nation that we live into today. So I want to begin by talking about our rights. The First Amendment clearly states this: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Our Constitution is based on the truth that all our rights come from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It empowers us. This right that is given to us by God empowers us to practice our faith or religion. It encourages us to engage in politics and the political discourse that is associated with, and peacefully assemble to advocate for the values that we hold dear. In fact, recently, our current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was quoted as saying that the separation of church and state statement is a misnomer. what he went on to say is that when Jefferson said it, he was explaining this, that they did not want the government to encroach upon the church, not that they didn't want the faith principles to encroach upon our public life. It's completely wrong for us to think that faith and religion should not impact culture and politics. That's not exactly what was going on. So, according to an article that was first dated March 18, 2010, in the Huffington Post, of all places, right? And this article was titled, "Why Aren't Schools Teaching Our Children Their Rights and Freedoms?" This is a really interesting article. If you want to Google it, you'll find it pretty much anywhere on out there. Back in 2010, it says that a recent survey of 1,000 Oklahoma high school students found that only 3% of the children would be able to pass the U.S. Immigration Service's citizenship exam. Now, I can only imagine what the difference would look like today, having another couple, 13 years down the line, and then a year off for COVID. Our kids are not being equipped to know the Constitution. Now, Thomas Jefferson famously said this: "Wherever people are well informed, they can be trusted with their own government." What became clear to me as I was led this 10-hour course with these kids here at the homeschool community is that our society is failing to empower our children. When we were deceived, not so long ago, but we were deceived into believing that religion and faith did not belong in politics or in the school, we essentially removed God from our government. Here's the interesting thing, though. Without God, we have left the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence impotent, right? It's defenseless. There's no way for them to defend themselves because we begin our statements by giving the authority structure to God. So when we remove him from that, our Declaration of Independence clearly states this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, the Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4th, 1776. Hopefully many of us know that. And this declaration essentially set us free from British rule. The Constitution itself was drafted some years later, and it was ratified in 1787, and it established the framework for this newly formed United States of America. One without the other literally cripples the entire country. So it's very, very important that we need to know what the truth is about the founding of our country. Now, there's this act. It's an amendment, and it's called the Johnson Amendment. Some of you may be even thinking, Mike, well, what about politics and religion and the Johnson Amendment that prevents pastors from speaking of political issues from the pulpit? Now, this amendment actually was, does it prevent us from practicing our faith as believers in the church? That's the question we got to ask ourselves, right? Do we as Christians have to be silent about political matters and moral matters? The Johnson Act prohibits tax-exempt organizations, including churches, from endorsing political candidates. Some argue that this restricts our freedom of speech and expression in political realms. So what happened is this was one way to lower the ability for the church to have influence in our society by putting this burden upon the church. Now, churches can engage in issues and advocate on things that are important, especially issues that involve discussing and taking a position, or especially those around political issues, right? We as a church, as Christians, we have a right and a responsibility to do such thing. We can talk about legislative matters without endorsing specific candidates. That's perfectly acceptable. It's not illegal. We can, and more importantly, we must educate our congregations and our communities about this, especially when it comes to moral and ethical considerations that are related to various issues. This is about exercising influence, not authority. That's what's really, really cool. When you start to study this, you start to realize that this isn't a whole lot different than our faith. Ephesians chapter 4 says that there were gifts given, like pastor and teacher and things of that nature, right? And the role of the pastor was to equip the saints for their good works of ministry. Now, this applies to things like justice, moral, law, and civil law as well. In fact, if you start to think about those areas, just those three areas, justice, moral law, and civil law, what you start to realize is that's the Torah. And so we are, in fact, supposed to exercise our voices and our faith. This is really, really important. Our government allows for us to peaceably assemble. We are encouraged to advocate on behalf of and to educate. All right, so what's the solution? Well, there's a lot to cover there, and I don't want to go too deep into it, but I want you to get a couple of ideas what we're talking about here before I cut out today. First, God's guidance. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of scriptures at you in the next few minutes, and I think it's really, really important that we read these and we understand where we are getting this from. So the first one that we want to look at is Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 18 through 20, where it says, when he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law. It's talking about Torah, taken from that of the Levitical priests. It is to be with him, and he's to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees. Now, this passage highlights the importance of our leaders being intimately familiar with God's laws and following it faithfully. I want you to think about that. In order for somebody to be the king of Israel, they had to write the Torah. Have you ever done that? It's an amazing experience. I promise you, grab a pen, a paper, just sit down and start in Genesis 1:1 and start writing the word of the Lord. The Lord will speak to you. He will touch your heart. He will transform your viewpoints, and he will make you into a new person. And that's the part of this that's really important, is that these kings were all instructed to do this, and then they're to read it over and over again, because this Torah, God's law, is how they're to rightly rule over the people. The next thing is, the next point I want to call it is the role of the people in choosing leaders. Now, this comes from Exodus 18, verse 21, and the Torah gives us responsibility as just citizens of the kingdom, as God's chosen people. We are to be active in selecting our leaders. But here's what it says. They are to select capable men from all the people. Who are these men? Men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and 10. Here we see that the criteria for choosing leaders is faithfulness to God, trustworthiness, and a commitment to justice. Wow, that's pretty impressive when you start to think about that. So as a Christian, I am to look for those qualities when I am to choose. What does it say here? I love it. Select capable men. That you could just take that when you vote for somebody in office. These are the qualities that we should be advocating for. All right. What about the next one? Seeking godly leadership. Now, this comes from Proverbs 29, verse 2. And this encourages us to seek leaders who align with biblical values. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. I don't have to point out anything in particular. Just look at your grocery bill. Look at the wars and rumors of wars. Look at the oppression. Look at the hatred and the violence. Would you say, based on what you are seeing in your world, not on the news, not on social media, what you are seeing in your world, have we experienced when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice? Or would you say when the wicked rule, the people groan? It doesn't take much. I know where I'm leaning on that one. I hope you can figure out where you're leaning. But this is important because this gives us a warning that the people that we choose to rule over us, that we give them authority in our lives and in our communities, whether it be the local public library or the school board. Maybe you're your local mayor or your state or senator or your governor or, yes, even the president. All of these people have authority and influence in our lives. And so we should demand, we should raise our voices up properly to expect that we find the ones who are righteous, because under them it says that we will rejoice. I'm looking forward to that. All right. How about the last point that I want to bring up here is that I think it's really, really important for us. It doesn't end here. We are called to play an active role in the political process. Here in America, we have a right to political process. We are encouraged to vote. We should not make it a burden. It should be a great privilege that we exercise. And this means that when we go into the polling places, we vote with conviction. We should volunteer in our communities and for those candidates that we support. And we should be supporting the candidates that are going to lead and further the biblical values that we hold so dearly in our lives, right? It is about being the salt and light in a world where they need flavor for the righteousness and the brilliance of God's truth. That's what it is when we exercise our faith in the political arena. So I want to encourage you today. Let us be a generation that seeks God's wisdom. Let us be a generation that lives out His truth, not ours, not the traditions of men, not the culture that we inherited, but literally living out God's truth and actively participate in shaping our world for the future generations. I'm finally at that age now where I look around and go, I get it. I now understand why it's so important for me as a Christian man to live out biblical principles, not just in my home, in my community. It's also important for me to encourage others to do the same thing, because my children and my grandchildren, if the Lord does not return, will inherit this world. And by my assessment, we're not leaving it in a really great place. All right. We also want to know that we don't want to be known only for our faith. We also want to be known for our commitment to the values that we hold dearly. These values include things like things that honor God, like justice, life, religious freedom for all. What I think I learned most about this Constitution class is just this, that it, as it relates to our faith, what I think I learned most from this Constitution class as it relates to our faith is this: religion or faith in our God or any false idol cannot and should not ever be mandated. I don't want that to ever happen. It is not how God wants us to love Him. He gave us a choice. He gave us free will so that we can choose to love Him, right? He wants our commitment, not our compliance. And so when we allow religion to be mandated by the government or to be silenced by the government, we are causing people to be complacent or compliant. Sorry about that. Compliant, not committed. I believe that if we live out our faith in all areas of our lives, whether that be our marriages, in our workplace, with our kids' sporting events, when we go to the grocery stores, and yes, even politics, loving God first and then loving our neighbors as ourselves, it will cause others to want to love our God too. We're to provoke them to jealousy. That's what's supposed to happen here. I hope you will join me next time as we continue to look for and explore the topics that are giving us a reason to believe there is Torah for today.